She threw me out in the rain like I was a thief. 1 hour later, her husband was on his knees in front of me. And the worst part? She never even knew who I really was. I wasn't there to steal anything. I wasn't there to cause trouble. I had come home for the first time in 32 years. If you've ever walked back into a place that used to be yours, not the walls, not the furniture, but the blood in your veins, then you understand the kind of trembling that lives in your chest. It's not fear exactly. It's memory colliding with reality. That afternoon, I stood in the marble foyer of a mansion that technically belonged to my brother. Crystal chandeliers. Imported Italian flooring. A staircase that curved like it was posing for a magazine spread. And at the top of those stairs stood his wife. She looked at me the way people look at something they found on the bottom of their shoe. "You don't belong here," she said. Her voice was polished. Educated. Cold. I told her I was family. She laughed. "Now let me take you back a little. I was 47 that year. I had grey at my temples. I didn't bother to dye. I had hands that had worked real jobs. And I had spent half my life believing my older brother, Daniel, wanted nothing to do with me. When we were kids, we were inseparable. 2 children surviving a father who drank too much and a mother who disappeared too often into her own silence. Daniel was the shield. I was the shadow behind him. Then he left. Scholarship. Ivy League. Finance. New York. Then London. Then headlines. Self-made billionaire. They loved that phrase. But I knew the boy who used to steal canned peaches so I could eat. Somewhere along the way, we lost each other. Or maybe he chose to lose me. I wrote letters at first. They stopped coming back. Eventually, I stopped sending them. Life hardened me in quieter ways. Marriage that didn't last. Jobs that paid the bills. A small apartment with thin walls and neighbors who argued at midnight. Nothing glamorous. But it was mine. Then 3 months before that rainy afternoon, I received a letter. Not from him. From a lawyer. Daniel wanted to see me. No explanation. No apology. Just an address and a time. You tell me, what would you have done? After decades of silence, would you have torn that letter up? Or would you have shown up anyway, just to see if the ghost of your childhood still had your eyes? I showed up. And that's how I found myself standing in his foyer while his wife examined me like damaged goods. She wore silk the way some women wear armor. Diamonds rested at her throat like tiny declarations of status. When I stepped inside to escape the rain, she moved subtly, as if I might stain the air. "I'm here to see Daniel," I said calmly. She descended the staircase slowly, each heel clicking like a countdown. "And you are?" she asked. "His sister," I almost said. But I didn't get the chance. Her gaze dropped to my hands. To the small velvet jewelry box I had picked up from a side table, absent-mindedly, nervously, waiting. Her eyes sharpened. "Put that down," she said. The temperature shifted. I set it back exactly where it had been. But it was already too late. "You people are unbelievable," she muttered. "You people." I felt that one land. And before I could respond, before I could explain who I was or why I'd come, she called security. She didn't ask questions. She didn't hesitate. She didn't even consider that I might belong there. When the guard took my arm, I didn't fight. Pride doesn't always scream. Sometimes it stands very still. As they escorted me toward the door, rain pouring beyond the glass, she said the words that still echo in my ears. "Next time you try touching my jewelry, make sure you can afford it." That was the moment something inside me went quiet. Not broken. Quiet. And 1 hour later, her husband, my brother, was kneeling in the rain in front of me. But he wasn't kneeling for her. He was kneeling for me. And she still didn't know why. Let me tell you how it all unraveled. Before that afternoon, before the rain and the humiliation, I had spent weeks convincing myself not to go. Daniel's lawyer had called twice after sending the letter. Polite. Efficient. Vague. Mr. Harrington would very much like to reconnect. Reconnect. As if we'd simply misplaced each other at a crowded party. I lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the south side of town. 2nd floor. No elevator. The carpet in the hallway always smelled faintly of detergent and someone else's cooking. I had a small balcony where I kept potted herbs. Basil. Mint. Things that grew if you gave them attention. My life wasn't extravagant, but it was steady. I worked as a compliance manager for a mid-sized logistics company. I paid my bills on time. I had 2 close friends who knew my whole history and still chose me. There's a kind of dignity in surviving quietly. Daniel, on the other hand, had become a headline. Tech investments, private equity, global philanthropy, interviews where he spoke about resilience and humble beginnings. He never mentioned me. Never mentioned the nights we shared one blanket in winter. When I looked him up online, yes, I did, I saw a man tailored to perfection. Silver at the temples, just like me. Except his looked intentional. And beside him in every photo was her. Victoria. Always angled toward the camera. Always immaculate. Charity galas. Art auctions. Fashion week. She looked like someone who had never had to wait for a paycheck to clear. I told myself none of that mattered, that I wasn't going there for money. I wasn't going there for inheritance. I was going because at some point in life, you either close the door gently, or you leave it cracked forever, wondering. Have you ever carried a question for so long that it starts to feel heavier than the answer might? I wonder how many of you listening have someone like that, a sibling, a parent, a friend, unfinished business sitting quietly in your chest. Tell me, did you ever go back? Or are you still standing outside the door? The morning of the visit, I chose a navy dress. Simple. Clean lines. Low heels. Nothing flashy. I didn't want to look like I was trying. But I didn't want to look small either. I took the train halfway, then a ride share the rest of the way. As the city shifted from brick buildings to gated properties, my stomach tightened. His house, mansion, really, sat behind iron gates that opened automatically once I gave my name. That should have been my first sign. They were expecting me. But not the way I thought. The driveway curved around a fountain. The kind you only see in luxury magazines. Water arched gracefully into a basin surrounded by manicured hedges. I remember thinking how quiet it was. Wealth absorbed sound. There were no children yelling. No traffic hum. Just controlled stillness. When I rang the doorbell, it echoed somewhere deep inside the house. A housekeeper opened the door. Kind eyes. Tired smile. Yes. I'm here to see Daniel Harrington, I said. She hesitated just slightly, just enough to notice. Before she could respond, I heard heels on marble. Sharp. Decisive. Victoria appeared at the top of the staircase like she'd been waiting for a performance cue. She looked me up and down. Not curious. Assessing. There was no warmth. No confusion. No "oh, you must be." Just calculation. And here's the thing that unsettled me most. She didn't seem surprised. Almost like she already knew I existed. Almost like my arrival had been discussed, but not welcomed. Still, I stood there believing, maybe foolishly, that once Daniel saw me, everything would shift. That blood would recognize blood. I didn't know then that I had walked into a house where my place had already been decided. And it wasn't beside my brother. It was at the door. Waiting to be dismissed. Victoria descended the stairs slowly, her hand gliding along the banister as if the house itself needed reassurance. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't ask how I knew Daniel. She stopped 3 steps above me, just high enough to look down. Yes, she said. There's something about a single word delivered without warmth. It can shrink a room. I'm here to see Daniel, I replied. He asked me to come. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. And you are? The housekeeper lingered near the doorway, pretending to straighten a side table. I could feel the shift in the air, curiosity turning into discomfort. I'm his sister. I said it plainly. No drama. No emphasis. Victoria didn't gasp. She didn't blink in shock. She smiled. But not the kind of smile you give family. The kind you give a story you don't believe. Daniel doesn't have a sister, she said calmly. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was worse. It was dismissive. Now, I could have pulled out the letter right then. I could have called the lawyer. I could have demanded that she confirm with her husband. But something in me hesitated. Because the way she said it, Daniel doesn't have a sister, didn't sound confused. It sounded rehearsed. And that's when the first real doubt crept in. Had he told her about me? Or had he erased me? Victoria stepped off the last stair and came closer. I could smell her perfume. Clean. Expensive. Sharp. If you're here looking for money, she continued, voice low, I suggest you leave now. There it was. The assumption. I felt heat rise in my chest, not embarrassment, but insult. I'm not here for money, I said evenly. I'm here because he asked me to come. She folded her arms. Daniel is in a meeting. And he doesn't entertain unexpected claims. Unexpected claims. As if I were a lawsuit. I glanced around the foyer while we stood there in that quiet standoff. A grand piano to the right. Contemporary art lining the walls. A glass console table with curated objects, books, sculptures, and a small velvet jewelry box sitting slightly open. I stepped aside, partly to create space, partly because standing under her scrutiny felt suffocating. My fingers brushed the velvet box without thinking. It was an anxious habit, touching objects when my nerves spiked. I lifted it gently, glanced at the necklace inside. Diamonds. Intricate setting. Beautiful craftsmanship. And that's when everything shifted. Put that down, she snapped. The sharpness in her voice startled even the housekeeper. I placed it back immediately. Exactly where it had been. I was just. Don't, she cut in. Don't insult me by pretending. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. I felt the ground tilt slightly beneath me. You think I came here to steal? I asked quietly. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her expression said enough. It wasn't just suspicion. It was certainty. And certainty without evidence is a dangerous thing. I searched her face for even a flicker of doubt. Nothing. Only entitlement. I'm calling security, she said, reaching for her phone. My heart pounded once, hard. I could have raised my voice. I could have demanded she call Daniel immediately. But I didn't. Because suddenly I needed to know something more than I needed to defend myself. I needed to know if my brother had truly erased me from his life, or if this woman had decided I didn't fit the narrative she'd built. Security arrived quickly. Too quickly. That told me something too. As the guard approached, I felt eyes on me, not hostile, but wary. Like I'd already been categorized. Victoria stepped back, maintaining distance, as if proximity itself carried risk. You were caught handling my jewelry, she told the guard. Please escort her out. Caught. Such a heavy word for such a small moment. The guard looked at me apologetically. I didn't resist. But inside, a storm was forming. As he guided me toward the door, I turned once more to Victoria. Does Daniel know I'm here? I asked. She held my gaze steadily. He will, she said. The doors opened. Rain poured down in sheets. And as I stepped outside, humiliation burning under my skin, one question echoed louder than the thunder. If you were me in that moment, would you have fought to stay? Or would you have walked away and let the truth surface on its own? I chose to walk into the rain. And that choice changed everything. The rain was cold. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just steady and inconvenient. Within seconds my hair clung to my face and my dress darkened against my skin. The guard stood awkwardly under the covered entrance, unsure whether to close the door completely. I walked past the fountain and stopped just outside the gates. I didn't cry immediately. First came the disbelief. Then came the sting. Then came the realization that this hadn't been a misunderstanding. This had been deliberate. I replayed every second in my mind. Victoria's lack of surprise. Her rehearsed denial. Security arriving too fast. Daniel doesn't have a sister. The words weren't confusion. They were policy. Which meant one thing. He had told her something about me. And whatever he'd said, it wasn't kind. I reached into my bag with trembling fingers and pulled out the letter from his lawyer. The paper had softened at the folds from how many times I'd read it. Mr. Daniel Harrington requests your presence. Requests. Not welcomes. Not Mrs. Requests. A black car turned into the driveway behind me. Sleek. Tinted windows. Expensive enough to glide instead of roll. It passed through the gates before they could close fully. And I knew. That was him. The car door opened. Polished shoes touched wet pavement. Daniel stepped out, holding a phone to his ear. He looked older than the photos. Not frail, just heavier. Responsibility does that. Or guilt. He ended the call mid-sentence when he saw me standing in the rain. He froze. Actually froze. Like his body recognized something before his mind caught up. Maria, he said. He hadn't said my name in 32 years. The sound of it broke something loose in my chest. I didn't run to him. I didn't collapse. I stood there. Soaked. Silent. His gaze flicked to the guard, then back to me. What are you doing outside? He demanded, not of me, but of the situation. I was just leaving, I said evenly. Leaving? His brow tightened. You just got here. Before I could answer, Victoria appeared under the doorway behind him. Composed. Unbothered. She was touching my jewelry, she said smoothly. I handled it. Handled it. Like I was a spill on the floor. Daniel's face shifted. Confusion first. Then something sharper. He looked at me again. Really looked. And I saw it, recognition fighting with shock. You were touching, he began. I picked up a box, I said calmly. For about 3 seconds. Victoria folded her arms. She claimed to be your sister. Claimed. The word sliced deeper than the accusation of theft. Daniel's jaw went tight. He turned slowly toward his wife. She is my sister. The rain seemed to pause around us. Victoria blinked. Once. You told me, she began. I told you we were estranged, he cut in. I never said she didn't exist. That silence that followed? That was the sound of truth surfacing. If you've ever been betrayed by omission, you know it doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with small missing pieces. Details not mentioned. History softened. I stood there realizing something painful. He hadn't erased me. He had minimized me. And she had filled in the rest. My humiliation hadn't been an accident. It had been built on a narrative. Midway through that moment, standing in wet shoes, I felt the full weight of it. Not just the insult, but the years. The letters unanswered. The absence explained away. If you've ever been reduced in someone else's story, if someone edited you down to something easier to manage, you understand this kind of ache. If that's happened to you, I want you to say it out loud somewhere safe. There's healing in naming it. Victoria's composure cracked first. You said she wanted money, she insisted quietly. Daniel's eyes flicked back to me. I never said that. But he didn't say he defended me either. And that was enough. The guard stepped back, unsure where to look. Rain continued falling, soaking through everything. Then Daniel did something I never expected. He walked toward me. Not halfway. All the way. And in front of the gates, in full view of his wife, his staff, and whoever might be watching from inside that mansion. My brother knelt. Not in apology exactly. Not in theatrics. But in shame. I am so sorry, he said. And in that moment, standing above the most powerful man I'd ever known, I didn't feel powerful. I felt tired. Because apologies don't undo humiliation. They just confirm it happened. And I still had to decide what I was going to do with that truth. When Daniel knelt in the rain, something inside me could have surged forward. Anger. Vindication. Triumph. It would have been easy to let it. After all, there's a certain satisfaction in watching someone powerful realize they've made a mistake, especially when that mistake is you. But standing there, soaked to the bone, I didn't feel victorious. I felt clear. Clarity is colder than anger. It doesn't shout. It settles. Stand up, I told him quietly. He did. Immediately. That told me something too. Victoria remained beneath the shelter of the doorway. Dry. Controlled. But her posture had shifted. Not defensive, calculating. She was recalibrating the story in her head. Daniel removed his jacket and tried to drape it over my shoulders. I stepped back. No, I said. Let's not pretend we're warm. He flinched. Inside, I was mapping the situation carefully. 40% planning. 30% remembering. 30% holding tension steady. That's how my mind works when it's tested. I knew 3 things in that moment. First, I was not going to argue in the driveway. Second, I was not going to cry in front of his wife. Third, whatever conversation happened next would be on my terms. Why did you invite me? I asked him. Not emotional. Just direct. He swallowed. Because I should have done it years ago. That's not an answer. Victoria stepped forward then. Daniel, perhaps this isn't the place. He raised a hand slightly, stopping her without looking. It's exactly the place, he said. Interesting. He wasn't kneeling to impress me. He was kneeling because something had cracked inside him. But here's what people don't tell you. When someone apologizes publicly, it doesn't automatically restore trust. Sometimes it simply exposes how fragile the foundation always was. Did you tell her I wanted money? I asked. His silence lasted one breath too long. I said, I didn't know your intentions. There it was. Not an accusation. But doubt. He hadn't defended me when it mattered. Victoria's voice sharpened. You made it sound like she might make claims, she said. You said we needed to be careful. Careful. I almost laughed. Careful of what? Blood? The rain softened slightly. Or maybe I stopped feeling it. In that instant, I realized something important. This wasn't about jewelry. It wasn't about wealth. It was about narrative control. Daniel had built an empire on precision. Clean lines. Strategic decisions. Risk assessment. And I was an unpredictable variable from a messy past. He had invited me back, but he hadn't prepared his world to receive me. That was his failure. Not mine. Here's what's going to happen, I said calmly. Both of them looked at me. Not as an intruder now. As a factor. We are not doing this in front of staff. We are not doing this in the driveway. And we are not doing this with assumptions hanging in the air. Victoria's jaw tightened. Daniel nodded. Come inside, he said. I paused. This was the moment. Revenge would have been walking away. Leaving him kneeling in unresolved guilt. Letting his marriage absorb the fallout. Control was stepping back into that house without shrinking. I chose control. We walked in together. Victoria moved aside. But she didn't apologize. Not yet. Inside, the air felt different. Not warmer, heavier. Daniel dismissed the staff quietly. The housekeeper's eyes lingered on me with something like relief. We sat in a private sitting room off the main hall. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Rain streaking the glass. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on knees. I was ashamed, he admitted. Of me. I asked. Of where we came from. Honesty can be brutal when it's late. Victoria remained standing for a moment before finally sitting across from us. Her composure was returning, but there was tension beneath it now. I acted on the information I was given, she said coolly. Which was not the same as saying I'm sorry. And I noticed that. I noticed everything. In my mind, I was weighing options. Expose the past publicly? Demand acknowledgement? Walk away with dignity? There's a fork in moments like this. Do you burn the bridge to prove you can? Or do you rebuild it carefully, knowing it may never hold the same weight? I looked at Daniel, really looked. He wasn't the boy who shielded me anymore. He was a man who had chosen comfort over truth. And now he was waiting to see what I would choose. So let me ask you something, and I mean this sincerely. If someone wronged you not out of cruelty but out of cowardice, would you punish them? Or would you give them the chance to be braver? I didn't know my answer yet. But I was about to find out. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't accuse. I told the truth. Victoria, I said, turning to her fully for the first time, you threw me out of this house because you believed I was beneath it. She held my gaze. I acted to protect my home. No, I replied calmly. You acted to protect your image of it. Daniel shifted beside me. Short breaths. Tight silence. You assumed I was after money, I continued. You assumed I didn't belong. And you never once considered that I might have come for something far more dangerous. Victoria's brow tightened. And what is that? She asked. History. That word landed. Daniel inhaled sharply. I stood then. Slow. Steady. No one asked me what I wanted, I said. Not when I was a child. Not when my letters went unanswered. Not today at your gate. The room felt smaller. You invited me here, I said to Daniel. But you didn't prepare your wife with the truth. You let her believe I was a threat. He opened his mouth. Closed it. That's when I made my move. Not dramatic. Decisive. I didn't come for your money, I said. I came because your lawyer told me you were restructuring your estate. Victoria stiffened. Daniel's head snapped up. Yes. He hadn't expected me to know that part. You're creating a family trust, I continued evenly. And you wanted to clear your conscience before deciding who belonged in it. Silence. Sharp and clean. Is that true? Victoria asked him. He didn't answer immediately. Which was answer enough. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folded document the lawyer had accidentally included in the envelope, a draft summary referencing additional beneficiaries pending reconciliation. I placed it gently on the glass table between us. I wasn't asking for inclusion, I said. I was deciding whether I wanted it. Victoria's composure cracked. You came here knowing this, she asked. I came here knowing I had a choice. Daniel stood abruptly. Maria, I never meant for you to be treated that way. But I was, I said. And here's the part where some of you might disagree with me. I didn't demand money. I didn't threaten legal action. I didn't ask him to choose between me and his wife. Instead, I did something far more unsettling. I want nothing from your estate, I said clearly. Both of them stared at me. I want a written statement acknowledging me as your sister. Publicly. In your own words. Not for the press. For the record. Victoria blinked. That's it, she asked. That's it. Daniel looked almost confused. You'd walk away from. Yes. I met his eyes without flinching. Because dignity is worth more than dividends. The tension in the room shifted. Not gone, transformed. Victoria studied me differently now. Not as a threat. As an equal. Possibly even as someone she had misjudged. Midway through that moment, I'll admit, I wondered what you would think of my choice. Some of you might say I should have secured financial protection. Others might say I should have exposed everything. If you were sitting in that room, would you have taken the money? Or would you have taken the acknowledgement? I didn't need wealth. I needed truth. Daniel's shoulders dropped, not in relief, but in recognition. I'll do it, he said quietly. And one more thing, I added. Victoria's chin lifted slightly. You owe me an apology. Not because I need it. But because you do. Silence again. Then, slowly, she stood. She walked toward me. And for the first time since I arrived, there was no superiority in her posture. I was wrong, she said. Simple. Unpolished. Real. I assumed the worst. And I treated you without respect. I'm sorry. I nodded once. No hug. No theatrics. Just acknowledgement. Daniel looked between us like a man watching tectonic plates settle. The storm outside had passed. Inside, something else had too. I had walked in humiliated. I walked out recognized. Not as a beneficiary. Not as a liability. As family. And that was the only inheritance I was willing to claim. I didn't stay for dinner. That surprised them. Victoria offered. Daniel insisted. The chef was already preparing something, apparently. But I declined gently. I've had enough for one day, I said. And I meant it. Recognition is exhausting when you've gone decades without it. Daniel walked me to the door himself. Not the gate this time. The actual front door. No security. No distance. Just us. I'll send the statement draft tomorrow, he said quietly. Make it honest, I replied. He nodded. There were 1,000 other things we could have said in that moment. Childhood memories. Questions about lost years. Accusations. Explanations. But sometimes reconciliation doesn't start with conversation. It starts with boundaries. The car ride home felt strangely peaceful. My dress had dried stiff from the rain. My hair was still slightly damp at the ends. I watched the city shift again, from manicured hedges to apartment blocks, from silence to traffic noise. And I felt lighter. Not triumphant. Not vindicated. Just steady. I hadn't reclaimed my childhood. I hadn't repaired 32 years. But I had corrected the present. There's a difference. 2 days later, the statement was published. Not a press conference. Not a flashy announcement. A simple addition to his foundation's website and corporate bio. Daniel Harrington is the proud brother of Maria Harrington, whose resilience and integrity shaped much of his early life. Resilience and integrity. I smiled when I read that. He had chosen his words carefully. But they were true. Victoria sent a separate handwritten note. Short. Direct. No excuses. I respected that more than a speech. Now here's where real life settles in. We didn't suddenly become inseparable. We didn't start vacationing together. Trust doesn't grow back overnight. It grows like those herbs on my balcony, slowly, if tended. Daniel called once a week at first. Awkward conversations. Long pauses. Shared memories resurfacing cautiously. Sometimes we laughed. Sometimes we didn't know what to say. Victoria joined a few of those calls late on. Her tone warmer. Less guarded. She asked about my work. My friends. My life. Not performative curiosity. Actual interest. And that mattered. But here's what I lost. I lost the illusion that my brother had been a victim of circumstance. He had made choices. He had chosen distance. He had chosen silence. And accepting that was harder than forgiving him. Because it meant understanding that the boy who protected me grew into a man who protected himself first. Midway through rebuilding, I asked myself something honestly. Would I handle it the same way if I could go back? Would I still walk into that house knowing what awaited me? Would I still refuse the money? And I want you to think about that in your own life. When you look back at a defining moment, would you choose differently? Or did you act in alignment with who you are? I realized something important. I hadn't acted out of pride. I had acted out of self-respect. There's a quiet difference. Months passed. The estate restructuring went through. My name was not included, just as I requested. Daniel respected that. Instead, he made a donation in our parents' names to a community shelter in our hometown. He asked if that felt right. It did. Not because it erased the past, but because it acknowledged it. Victoria and I met privately once for coffee, neutral territory. No marble floors. No chandeliers. She admitted she grew up with nothing too. That wealth had been her armor. That she feared anyone who threatened the stability she fought for. I misread you, she said. Yes, I replied. We both smiled slightly. Honesty levels people. Life returned to its rhythm. My apartment still had thin walls. My balcony herbs still needed watering. But something fundamental had shifted. I no longer wondered whether I existed in my brother's world. I did. Not as a secret. Not as a liability. As truth. And that, for me, was enough. The rain that day had washed something away. Not my dignity. Just the silence. Time has a way of sanding down sharp edges. When I think about that afternoon now, I don't feel the sting of the rain or the humiliation at the gate. I remember the clarity. The moment I realized I didn't have to beg for belonging. That was the real shift. Not Daniel kneeling. Not Victoria apologizing. But me understanding that my worth had never been tied to their acceptance. For years, I carried a quiet ache. A question that whispered in the background of my life. Why wasn't I enough to stay connected to? If you've ever asked yourself that about someone, a sibling, a parent, a partner, you know how heavy that question can become. It seeps into other relationships. It makes you second-guess invitations. It makes you hesitate before reaching out. But here's what I learned. Sometimes people distance themselves not because you are lacking, but because you remind them of something unresolved in themselves. Daniel didn't erase me because I was unworthy. He minimized me because I represented a past he hadn't fully made peace with. And Victoria didn't throw me out because I looked like a thief. She reacted because uncertainty threatens people who have built their lives on control. Understanding that doesn't excuse behavior. But it explains it. An explanation is powerful. Forgiveness is complicated. I didn't wake up the next morning suddenly free of every old hurt. Healing doesn't move in straight lines. There were days I replayed that moment at the gate and felt anger rise again. But each time, I asked myself a different question. Did I leave that house smaller than I walked in? No. I left taller. And that's how I measure closure now. Not by whether someone else regrets what they did. But by whether I abandoned myself in the process. I didn't. So let me ask you something before we close this chapter together. When someone underestimates you, disrespects you, or rewrites your story without permission, what do you fight for? Their validation? Their punishment? Or your own steady sense of self? There isn't one right answer. Some people need distance. Some need confrontation. Some need restitution. What matters is that your response aligns with your values, not your wounded pride. I chose acknowledgement over inheritance. Truth over leverage. Dignity over drama. And in doing that, I discovered something simple but powerful. You don't have to win against someone to reclaim yourself. Daniel and I are still learning each other. Victoria and I are still careful, but genuine. Life didn't turn into a fairy tale. It turned into something better. Honest. And honesty, even when it's late, is a gift. If you're standing outside a metaphorical gate in your own life, soaked in doubt, waiting to be recognized, hear me clearly. You already belong to yourself. Everything else is negotiation. So that's my story, folks. If it resonated with you, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far Kamora's voice travels. Self-respect will always outlast inherited wealth.